In the early UC-0070s, the newly formed Principality of Zeon began building up its army. Anticipating the inevitable clash with the numerically superior Earth Federation forces, they knew they needed some kind of edge. And before long, this edge would arrive in the form of mobile suits. Humanoid weapons that would revolutionize the way wars were fought. But by themselves, these new Zaku mobile suits could only do so much. They needed a proper support system to be in place, and more importantly, Zeon ships needed to carry these new weapons into battle. And you know what they also needed? Good food, because an army marches on its stomach. Which brings me to today's sponsor, Factor, the healthy and convenient alternative to fast food and takeout. I love food, but what I don't love, and also don't have time for, is the preparation and the cleanup. But that's something you don't have to worry about with Factor's pre-made meals, which are fresh, non-frozen, and designed by dietitians, like a carefully crafted mobile suit for battle. And they're just as versatile too. You can choose your meal plan ranging from 4 to 18 meals a week, and there's over 27 dishes and over 33 add-ons to choose from, in various categories: keto, calorie smart, vegan, and vegetarian. I had a look at the menu, and it is definitely Gundam approved. They've got a jalapeno popper burger and a fiesta grilled chicken in tomato sauce. And squash. So if you want to give your meals a go, you can use the code on screen either through the link down below or go to go.factor75.com. Not only will you get 50% off of your first box, but you'll also be supporting the channel, like a Musai supporting the Zakus. But at the time the first mobile suits were introduced, the main Zeon ship was the Chibe-Class, sometimes also called the Chibe-Class. A heavy cruiser that was built for conventional warfare with ship versus ship combat in mind. But fortunately for Zeon, its large cargo bay could easily be modified to carry and handle mobile suits. In fact, with a standard carrying capacity of 8 machines, the Chibe could carry more machines than a lot of later dedicated carriers. But as with so many things, the numbers were only part of the story. Zeon wanted a warship dedicated to carrying and supporting the Zaku. And so the Musai was born, the first purpose-built mobile suit carrier. So of course, its main feature was a fully equipped mobile suit hangar below the bridge, complete with launch catapults. But unlike later ships, the catapults were facing to the back instead of to the front. It's not sure what the intended goal of this was, but in practice, this meant that the mobile suits launching from the Musai would have to spend precious fuel and time correcting their course before being able to head into battle. Another feature that isn't often seen on other ships is a dedicated cooling room away from the main hangar. This room was vital for the smooth operation of the mobile suits, as it could quickly cool the machines down, allowing them to be serviced and be sent back into action faster. And by having it near the front of the ship, the mobile suits could also save on propellant by not having to fly around. And what's perhaps a bit funny to hear for the first warship that was specifically designed to carry mobile suits is that in the past there was a lot of debate on how many mobile suits the ship could carry, with estimates ranging from 4 to 8. However, modern sources have settled on 6, with 4 mobile suits that can be stored in the main hangar and 2 in the Komusai that was on the bow of the ship. But we do need to make an important side note here. The 2 suits stored in the Komusai could only be deployed after the thing had launched, so more often than not, the Musais would have a mobile suit complement of 4 units. The ship itself then had a very unconventional shape, with the 2 thermonuclear engines being on struts extending from the main hangar. However, there were very good reasons for this design. The first was that it could minimize the damage taken. If one of the thermonuclear rocket engines was hit and exploded, it wouldn't take the other engine or the rest of the ship with it. And the other is that the space in between the two engines and the hull created a convenient anchor point for various pieces of equipment. Things like extra fuel tanks for longer operations, or HLVs for Earth ascent operations. And in terms of weapons, the Musai was equally formidable. On paper. Its 3 powerful twin megaparticle cannons ensured that it packed more of a punch at a longer range than its Federation counterpart, the Salamis. And in addition to that, it came with 2 Type 145 large missile launchers and 10 C-class small missile launchers. But notably absent are any form of close-in weapon systems. This was done because, in theory, the Musai would rely on the Zaku's for dealing with any kind of fighter craft or possible future Federation mobile suits. But in practice, it meant that the Musai was a sitting duck once Federal fighters, gunboats, or later on mobile suits got close enough. And those powerful twin megaparticle cannons, well, not only did they take several minutes to charge each shot, but they also had severe blind spots, again making things dangerous for the light cruiser when the fighting got close and personal. But back to the positives. For quick resupplying, the ship had 3 supply hatches on both the left and right side of the hangar that allowed for supplies from a Papua-class ship to be brought in directly through conveyor belts. And now let's focus a bit on the Komusai that was stored on the bow. This was a very versatile atmospheric reentry capsule that could also double as a fighter plane thanks to its 2 Vulcan guns and reasonable maneuverability. And they were sometimes even used as escort fighters, but their main use was for atmospheric reentry with the 2 mobile suits that were stored inside of them. And thanks to the fact that they were launched from a guide rail, they could undergo atmospheric reentry without having to use up any fuel other than for attitude control. Once on Earth then, thanks to their compact size, they could land on board of a Gao assault carrier. Now, it could also land normally, but due to the design, it unfortunately had poor visibility. As for the Musai in its entirety then, as with every popular design, it had a lot of variants, both minor and major. And the most famous one is without a doubt the Falmel, sometimes also called Char's Musai. This was originally Dozil Zavi's personal Musai, but after the Battle of Loom, it was assigned to Char Aznable as part of his promotion for his performance during the battle. However, there are also documents saying that the Falmel wasn't just a personal modification, but instead part of a line of commander-used Musais. Another minor variant then, with quite some speculation surrounding it, is the 2-turret version that appeared near the end of the war. This is a cost-cut version of the Musai because the war was beginning to turn against Zeon, but it did have some advantages over the 3-turret version. The output of the 2 remaining turrets could be increased, it was faster, had better mobile suit handling capabilities, and also had more storage space. So despite being branded as the budget version, it might actually have been superior in the grand scheme of things. Also, while looking for footage, I noticed that some of the Musais present at Operation British were 2-turret versions, meaning that the first ships of this type must have already been around before the war had even begun, but that the mass production of it didn't truly start until the tide started to turn against Zeon. And then the final small variant was a version with a different exhaust. The standard Musai had 2 large exhaust vents on each side of the bow, but there's also a version with 3 smaller exhaust vents. It's unknown what kind of difference in performance these 2 versions had, but it's interesting to note that the version with the small exhausts is the version of the ship that appeared in MS Igloo, where the Musais were also given slightly different measurements and more missile launchers, in addition to having a different naming scheme. With only a few exceptions, Musais have names ending with mel, like the Falmel, Camel, Swamel, Tokmel, Baromel, Ahamel, etc. But the ships that appear in Igloo are named after German cities and towns, Schleswig, Kempten, and Nordhausen. Near the end of the war then, two completely new Musais would make an appearance, each with a very different design philosophy and purpose. The Musai late production type was designed as an overall upgrade of the original Musai and sought to correct all of its weaknesses. For better defense against mobile suits and fighters, it was outfitted with 10 twin 120mm machine guns. For better anti-ship combat, it received 2 extra twin megaparticle cannons for a total of 5, radiator fins were installed to deal with the extra strain put onto the generator, and the mobile suit hangar was overhauled. Rather than a single hangar, there was now one hangar on each side of the hull, with 2 catapults each, making it possible for the late type to launch all 4 of its mobile suits at once. And in between these 2 mobile suit decks is a dedicated maintenance space for even better mobile suit handling capabilities. And the Musai itself wasn't the only thing that received a complete overhaul. Instead of the Komusai, the late type had the Komusai II. It now has 2 Gatling gun turrets, a more aerodynamic shape, and also a cockpit with better visibility for landing. And last but not least, it could also be outfitted with a booster unit to leave the atmosphere all by itself. What remained the same then was its mobile suit capacity, 2 in the Komusai and 4 in the main hangar for a total of 6. The second variant then was the Musai final production type, and rather than upgrading the existing Musai, this version seemed to be mainly focused on being a refined version of the twin turret Musai. The soft round edges have now become much more angular, and due to an extremely limited trial run, not too much is known about the performance of these ships. Upgrades include a larger cruising range, better mobility, and a larger mobile suit hangar. Although, we don't know if this means that they could handle more mobile suits, or if this simply means that the ship could handle them better. In terms of weapons though, all missile launchers were scrapped, leaving the ship with only the 2 twin megaparticle cannons. Another big mystery is whether or not it had a Komusai. Most sources agree that it didn't, but some outliers claim that it did have one. After the One-Year War then, the Principality of Zeon would revert back to the Republic of Zeon, and as part of the peace treaty with the Federation, they were allowed to keep a standing army, including a fleet. And the main ship of this fleet would become the Musai Kai-Class. Rather than going with the brand new late production version or the final production version, this was a simple overhaul of the old Musai. A move that probably saved the war-torn nation quite some money, and was also simply very effective. The biggest changes were made to the weapons, with the addition of 2 secondary beam cannons but the removal of the small missile launchers, and the addition of radiator fins for better heat dissipation. Other changes include new antennas for on the bridge, and a slightly overhauled hull. It is also never explicitly stated how many mobile suits the Kai-Class could handle, but it's probably safe to assume that this remained unchanged from the standard Musai. 4 in the main hangar and 2 in the Komusai. The first really big change then would come at the end of the Grips War in the form of the Endra, a completely new ship that was built by Axis Zeon and would implement some of the features seen in other mobile suit carrying vessels and the lessons learned from the old Musai. The mobile suit hangar was now mounted in the bow, with 2 catapults facing forwards instead of backwards, although, rather than the traditional separate catapults, the catapults were now in a cross-shaped pattern. For the weapons then, it now came outfitted with 5 single megaparticle cannons placed throughout the hull for excellent coverage, 1 smaller twin megaparticle cannon behind the mobile suit hangar, a small double beam cannon at an unknown location, and an unknown amount of missile launchers, also at an unknown location. But still, just like the Musai-class, it seems like the Endra-class lacked any kind of real close-in weapon systems and would still mostly rely on its 6 mobile suits for protection against enemy mobile suits and fighters. However, in a recent illustration of the Endra from the Advance of Zeta series, the small double beam cannons were interpreted as anti-air guns and placed throughout various parts of the hull. And perhaps the biggest change then was that the Endra-class was able to operate under gravity, meaning that it was highly likely that the ship had a Minovsky craft system, but this is something that is never explicitly mentioned. To get to the Earth then, the Endra can descend by using a Balyut. And just like the old Musais, the Endra was equipped with a Komusai that is now placed at the back of the bridge. And what's interesting to point out here is that it's still called a Ko-Musai and not a Ko-Endra. Because despite the completely new design, some sources still classify the Endras as a Musai-class ship. Finally then, in terms of individual differences, the most striking one is without a doubt the color scheme. The standard color for the Endra is two-tone green, but there were also some ships with more striking color schemes like blue, yellow, and orange. A more important difference though are 2 types of bridges. There's a special version with an antenna and an extra turret that seems like it's mostly given to high-ranking Neo-Zeon commanders, and a standard version without those and a slightly simplified design. The class would soon prove its value, and just like the Musai-class before it, the Endra-class would become Axis' main light cruiser during the first Neo-Zeon War. But they wouldn't be the only ones using the cruiser. Not only would several units survive the war and pop up again during later Neo-Zeon uprisings, but one of the Zeon remnant groups that Axis was working with would create their own custom variant. And this was the Endra Kai-Class, usually referred to as the Enpra-Class, after the first ship of the line, the Enpra. It was mostly the same as the Endra-Class, but as with so many designs used by Mars Zeon, they wanted it to resemble the things used by the old Principality of Zeon. So as a result, a third forward-facing megaparticle cannon was added, the bridge modified slightly, and 2 extra engine modules were added on struts, all to make it more visually similar to the standard Musai class. Over 10 of these ships were built and sent out to support Axis, but only a few would eventually make it back to base. A much more radical departure from the original Musai then was the Musaka-Class. But again, just like the Endra-Class, the Musaka-Class was sometimes still classified as a Musai class. And perhaps the biggest change, other than the Reolula-inspired red color scheme, was the shape of the ship. No longer did it have the oddly bent hull with the separate engine blocks hanging off of struts, but instead it became the shape that we would expect for a ship or for a spaceship. The engines were now connected directly to the rest of the main body, and their output had also been increased significantly, with radiator fins attached to the bottom of the ship to offset the increased heat. This then gave the Musaka-class increased cruising range, and most important of all, the ability to launch rapid raids against the Federation. And during these raids, the Musaka-class's arsenal consisted of 6 mobile suits, 4 twin megaparticle cannons with an output equal to those of the Reolula's secondary guns, 6 missile launchers, and 12 anti-air guns. And unlike most other ships of the era, the 2 launch catapults weren't horizontal, but instead angled, a design choice that would later return with the Crossbone Vanguard's Zamuth Gar class. 11 ships are known to have been built and are easily distinguishable thanks to their hull markings, but it is sometimes speculated that up to 13 were completed. These ships would mainly participate in the Second Neo-Zeon War, sometimes also known as Char's Rebellion, but afterwards, some of the surviving ships would also be used by the Sleeves, a Neo-Zeon remnant group. These vessels were painted in green, but were otherwise unchanged. The final Musai variant then was the RF Musai, or the Refined Musai. This ship was made by the Oldsmobile Army to resemble the old Principality of Zeon Musai, but other than the fact that at least 3 of them existed, and that they apparently closely resembled the Musai final production type, not much is known about this ship. But the Musai-class wouldn't just have its own lineage. As the first mobile suit carrier ever, the ship would also influence other designs like the Gundam-class or the Alexandria-class and its successors. But those are stories for another time. And that has been all for the long development history of the Musai. But before I sign off completely, I want to end with an interesting observation from the second Mobile Suit Strategic Analysis book. Because the Musai's launch catapults are facing backwards, and because the design instead seems to focus on its prominent 3 twin mega particle cannons, they speculate that the Musai was designed as a warship first, and a mobile suit carrier second. After all, even though Zeon did have high hopes for their mobile suits, they did have yet to prove their value in real combat at the time of the Musai class's commissioning. Something that wasn't the case at all with later mobile suit carriers like the Pegasus class. But that is also a story for another time. Right now, all that's left to say is that for more similar content, don't forget to like and subscribe. A big thank you to Factor for sponsoring the video. Again, link down below. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great day, and I'll see you all next time.